The blizzard hit Casa Grande, Arizona territory, with a fury that no one had seen in 40 years, transforming the desert town into a frozen wasteland that swallowed the familiar landscape beneath layers of ice and snow. Thomas Ashford had been checking his horses in the stable when the first flakes began to fall, thick and heavy, driven sideways by a wind that screamed down from the mountains like something possessed. He was 26 years old, a ranch hand turned cattle driver who had settled in Casa Grande 3 months prior, tired of the endless trail and hoping to find something more permanent. The stable master, old Miguel, had warned him that strange weather was coming, that his bones ached with the prophecy of it, but Thomas had laughed it off. This was Arizona. Snow came occasionally in winter, but never like this. By nightfall, the temperature had plummeted so drastically that Thomas could barely make it from the stable to the boarding house where he rented a room. The wind cut through his heavy coat like it was made of paper. Ice formed on his mustache and eyebrows within seconds of stepping outside. He pressed forward through the white curtain of snow, keeping one hand on the buildings to guide himself, his boots crunching through powder that was already knee-deep. When he finally stumbled through the door of the boarding house, Mrs. Chen, the proprietor, rushed forward with blankets. She was a Chinese woman who had come west with her husband during the railroad construction and stayed after his death, making a living from the travelers and workers who needed a clean bed and hot meals. She wrapped the blankets around Thomas's shoulders, her face creased with worry. "This is bad," she said, her accent still thick despite 20 years in the territory. "Very bad. The stage from Tucson was supposed to arrive this afternoon. No sign of it." Thomas nodded, his teeth chattering too violently to speak. He moved closer to the pot-bellied stove in the center of the common room, where 3 other boarders huddled, their faces grim. Outside, the wind howled like a dying animal, and the windows rattled in their frames. The storm raged for 3 days straight. Casa Grande, a town of adobe buildings and desert dust, became unrecognizable under the blanket of white. The few wooden structures groaned under the weight of the snow. Livestock died in their pens despite every effort to save them. 2 elderly residents froze to death in their homes before anyone could reach them. The town's doctor, a harried man named Paulson, worked himself to exhaustion treating frostbite and pneumonia. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The sun emerged, blindingly bright against the white landscape, and the temperature began its slow climb back toward something survivable. Thomas joined the other men in digging out the main street, their breath steaming in the still frigid air. They found the stage from Tucson half a mile outside town, buried in a snowdrift. The driver and both passengers had frozen to death, their bodies preserved in grotesque tableaus of their final moments. It was Thomas who found the letter, frozen solid in the grip of a woman who sat inside the coach. She had been young, maybe 30, dressed in the practical clothing of a frontier woman. Her face was peaceful, almost serene despite the violence of her death. In her hand, clutched against her chest, was an envelope so frost-covered that the address was barely visible. "Bring everything back to town," Sheriff Morrison ordered, his face gray with exhaustion. "We will need to identify them, notify their families." Thomas carefully pried the letter from the dead woman's fingers, feeling like a grave robber, but knowing that whatever message she had been carrying deserved to reach its destination. Back in town, he set it near the stove to thaw, watching as the ice slowly melted and the paper began to soften. When he could finally open it without tearing the fragile pages, he found himself reading words that seemed to burn themselves into his mind. The letter was addressed to Catherine Miller, care of the general store in Casa Grande. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, as if written in great haste or distress. It read, "Dearest Catherine, I pray this letter finds you before it is too late. Father has arranged my marriage to Raymond Holbrook despite my protests. You know what kind of man he is, what he did to Sarah Johnson before her family fled to California. I cannot marry him. I will not. I have decided to run, but I need your help. I have some money saved, enough perhaps to start over somewhere far from New Mexico. Could I come to you? Could you help me find work, a place to stay, anything that might give me a chance at a life of my own choosing? I know it has been 3 years since we have seen each other, since you moved to Arizona, but you are the only person I trust with this. I am desperate, Catherine. If I do not hear from you within 2 weeks, I will have no choice but to take my chances alone. Please write back. Please help me. Your loving cousin, Beatrice Robinson." Thomas read the letter 3 times, his heart sinking with each pass. The date at the top was from 6 weeks ago. He asked Mrs. Chen if she knew Catherine Miller. "Yes," she said, her face sad. "She works at Henderson's store. Nice girl. She has been waiting for a letter from her cousin in New Mexico. Asks every time the stage comes if there is mail for her." Thomas found Catherine Miller sorting bolts of fabric in the back of the general store. She was a plain woman in her late 20s, with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. When he introduced himself and explained about the letter, her face went white. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, no." "Beatrice?" "I am sorry," Thomas said gently. "Was the woman on the stage?" "No," Catherine said quickly. "No, Beatrice would not have been on that stage. She was waiting to hear from me first. But if this letter never reached me, then she—" Her hands flew to her mouth. She said she would take her chances alone if she did not hear back. Mr. Ashford, she could be anywhere. She could be in terrible danger. She took the letter with trembling hands and read it, tears streaming down her face. "Raymond Holbrook is a monster," she said when she finished. "He owns half of Silver City and thinks that means he owns the people too. There were rumors about what he did to Sarah Johnson, how he forced himself on her, how her family had to flee because no one would stand up to him. If Beatrice refused to marry him, if she ran away." She looked up at Thomas with desperate eyes. "We have to find her. We have to help her." Thomas had no particular reason to involve himself in the troubles of a woman he had never met. He had his own life to build, his own future to secure. But something about that letter, about the desperation in those carefully penned words, had lodged itself in his chest like a burr. And looking at Catherine's tear-stained face, he found himself nodding. "You know where she would have gone?" he asked. Catherine thought for a moment. "She would have headed for Casa Grande anyway, I think. Even without hearing from me, she knows I am here, and it is far enough from Silver City that Holbrook might not immediately look for her here. But the storm hit 2 weeks ago. If she was traveling then—" "The roads would have been impassable," Thomas finished. "She could be stranded anywhere between here and New Mexico." Catherine gripped his arm. "Will you look for her, please? I would go myself, but I have no horse, no experience traveling in these conditions. I can pay you something, not much, but I have savings." "Keep your money," Thomas said, surprising himself. "I will look for her. Can you describe her?" "She is 22 years old with dark brown hair and blue eyes, tall for a woman, about 5.5 feet. She has a small scar on her left eyebrow from when we fell out of a tree as children. She is smart and strong, but she has lived a sheltered life. Her father is a banker in Silver City, and she was raised to be a proper lady." Catherine's voice broke. "She is not prepared for this kind of hardship." Thomas gathered supplies that afternoon. The general store owner, Henderson, gave him a discount when he heard what Thomas was planning. Mrs. Chen packed enough food to last 2 weeks, refusing payment. Sheriff Morrison provided a map and marked the likely routes someone traveling from Silver City to Casa Grande might take. "Be careful," the sheriff warned. "The storm has made everything dangerous. Rivers are frozen, but the ice might not hold. Mountain passes could have avalanches. And if this Raymond Holbrook is as bad as Catherine says, he might have men out looking for the girl too." Thomas set out the next morning on his best horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper. He led a pack horse loaded with supplies, blankets, and extra food. The landscape was still frozen, the desert transformed into something alien and beautiful and deadly. The Sagueros wore caps of snow like old men in white hats. The normally dry washes ran with ice melt, and the ground was treacherous with hidden rocks beneath the snow. He followed the main road east, toward the New Mexico border, scanning the landscape for any sign of a traveler in distress. The first 2 days yielded nothing but cold and frustration. He stopped at a ranch house and was told that no one had passed through. The family there, the Johnstons, gave him a hot meal and let him sleep in their barn. "You are a good man doing this for a stranger," Mrs. Johnston said as she ladled stew into his bowl. "Not many would." "I am not sure what I am yet," Thomas admitted, "but that letter," she sounded so scared. "Fear has a way of reaching across distances," Mrs. Johnston said wisely. "You heard her call for help. That is a rare thing." On the third day, Thomas found the first real sign. A broken wagon wheel, half buried in snow, lying beside the road. It was relatively fresh, the wood not yet weathered. He dismounted and examined it, finding small footprints in the snow leading away from the spot. The prints were partially filled in, but he could follow them well enough. They led north, off the main road, toward a line of low hills. His heart began to pound. Someone had broken down here and decided to go on foot, probably seeking shelter. But why north, away from the road? He followed the tracks carefully, leading Copper by the reins. The footprints were small, definitely a woman's, and they wandered occasionally, suggesting exhaustion or confusion. After an hour, he saw something dark against the white hillside, a cave entrance partially obscured by an overhang of rock. He tied the horses and approached cautiously. "Hello," he called out. "Is anyone there? My name is Thomas Ashford. I am looking for Beatrice Robinson. I have a letter from her, a letter that never reached her cousin Catherine." Silence. Then, from deep within the cave, a weak voice. "Catherine?" Thomas felt a surge of relief so strong it nearly buckled his knees. "Yes, Catherine Miller in Casa Grande. She sent me to find you. Are you hurt?" "I." "Yes, my ankle. And I am very cold." He retrieved a lantern from Copper's saddlebag and entered the cave. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust, but then he saw her. Beatrice Robinson was huddled against the back wall of the cave, wrapped in blankets that looked thin and inadequate. Her face was pale, almost blue, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her dark hair was matted and tangled, but her blue eyes, when they met his, were alert and intelligent despite her obvious suffering. "You are real," she whispered. "I thought maybe I was dreaming again." He knelt beside her, already pulling off his heavy coat to wrap around her shoulders. "How long have you been here?" "I do not know. Days. The storm came so fast. My wagon broke and I tried to walk, but I hurt my ankle and could not go on. I found this cave. I thought I was going to die here." Her teeth chattered so violently she could barely speak. Thomas built a fire at the cave entrance. Using wood he had brought and some dry brush he found deeper in the cave. As the flames grew, he heated water and made coffee, adding extra sugar for the warmth and energy it would provide. He helped Beatrice drink it, holding the cup to her lips because her hands shook too badly to manage it herself. "We need to get you warm," he said. "Your fingers and toes, are they numb?" "Yes, everything is numb." He carefully removed her boots, wincing at the sight of her feet. They were red and swollen, showing the early signs of frostbite, but not, thank God, the black that would mean tissue death. He wrapped them in warm cloths and then in blankets, then did the same with her hands. Her ankle was badly swollen and bruised, probably sprained when she fell. "This is going to hurt," he warned before he wrapped it tightly with strips of cloth from his medical kit. She bit back a cry, tears streaming down her face, but she did not pull away. When he finished, she leaned back against the cave wall, exhausted from even that small amount of movement. "Thank you," she managed. "I thought no one would come." "Your letter arrived," Thomas said. "It was frozen in the hand of a woman who died on the stage. I brought it to Catherine, and she asked me to find you." Beatrice's eyes widened. "Someone died? Oh no, was it? No one you knew, I think." "A passenger from Tucson." She closed her eyes, fresh tears leaking from beneath the lids. "All this death and suffering, and it is my fault. If I had not run, if I had just done what Father wanted." "No," Thomas said firmly. "None of this is your fault. You had every right to refuse to marry a man you did not want, especially one like Raymond Holbrook." Her eyes opened, focusing on him with new intensity. "Catherine told you about him. She told me enough. About Sarah Johnson. About what kind of man he is." Beatrice laughed bitterly. "She does not know the half of it. No one does, but I knew. I knew what he was, what he would do to me. I could not." Her voice broke. "I could not let him touch me." Thomas felt a cold anger settle in his gut, different from the winter cold all around them. "You do not have to explain yourself to me. You did the right thing by running." "Did I? Look where it got me. Alone in a cave, dying slowly of cold." "You are not dying," Thomas said. "Not anymore. When the fire has warmed you enough, when you have eaten something hot, we are going to get you to Casa Grande, to Catherine, to safety." She studied his face in the firelight. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me." He considered the question. Why was he doing this? He could have given the letter to Catherine and left it at that. He could have wished Beatrice Robinson well and gone back to his own life. But something had pulled him out here, into the frozen wilderness, searching for a woman who was nothing to him but words on a page. "I read your letter," he said finally. "I read the fear in it, the desperation, and I could not just let it go. Maybe that makes me a fool, but there it is." "It makes you a good man," Beatrice said softly. "Better than most I have known." They stayed in the cave for the rest of that day and through the night. Thomas kept the fire burning, fed Beatrice hot food and coffee, and watched as color slowly returned to her face. He told her about Casa Grande, about the storm that had hit the town, about Catherine's worry and her determination to help. Beatrice talked too, once she had warmed enough to do so without her teeth chattering. She told him about her life in Silver City, about her father's bank and the social expectations that had shaped her upbringing. She spoke of her mother, dead 5 years from cholera, and how her father had never been the same after. "He became obsessed with money and status," she said. "Raymond Holbrook represents both. Father could not see past that, or he did not want to." When I told him what I had heard about Holbrook, what Sarah Johnson's mother had confided to me before they left, he called me hysterical. He said I was being influenced by women's gossip and imagination. "But you knew it was true." "I knew. I saw the way Holbrook looked at me, like I was a thing he had already purchased. I saw the coldness in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. He is a cruel man, Mr. Ashford. He hides it well behind fine clothes and charitable donations, but I saw it." "Thomas," he said. "Call me Thomas." She smiled faintly. "Thomas, and you must call me Beatrice." As night fell and the temperature dropped again, Thomas rigged a shelter using blankets and rope, creating a small enclosed space near the fire where the heat would be trapped. They huddled inside it together. necessarily close in the confined space. He could feel her shivering against him, her body still struggling to regain warmth after so many days of cold. "Tell me about yourself," she said as they lay there in the darkness, the firelight dancing on the cave walls beyond their shelter. "Who is Thomas Ashford when he is not rescuing foolish women from caves?" he laughed. "You are not foolish, but there is not much to tell. I was born in Missouri, came west when I was 18. I have been a ranch hand, a cattle driver, a scout for the Army for a while. I settled in Casa Grande because I was tired of moving, tired of always being on the trail. You have family, a sister, married to a farmer in Kansas. My parents both died of fever when I was 16. That is when I went to work on a ranch, and I have been working ever since." "That is a lonely life," Beatrice said quietly. "I suppose it is. I never thought much about it. Work kept me busy, kept me fed. That seemed like enough. And now—" He was quiet for a moment, feeling the warmth of her beside him, thinking about the past few days and how they had changed something fundamental in his understanding of his own life. "Now I am not so sure. Maybe there is more to want than just work and food and a place to sleep." She shifted closer, seeking warmth, and he put his arm around her shoulders without thinking. She tensed for just a moment, then relaxed against him with a sigh. "Thank you for finding me, Thomas," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up." "I would have searched until I found you," he said, and realized it was true. "Somehow I knew you were out here, waiting." They slept fitfully, waking often to tend the fire or shift position as the cold seeped through their layers of blankets. But there was a comfort in the shared warmth, in the knowledge that neither of them was alone anymore. Morning came with clear skies and temperatures that were almost bearable. Thomas examined Beatrice's ankle and found that the swelling had gone down slightly. Her fingers and toes looked better too, the dangerous redness fading. She was able to stand with his help, though putting weight on the injured ankle made her gasp in pain. "Can you ride?" he asked. "It will be easier than walking, but the horse's movement might jar your ankle." "I can manage," she said, her jaw set with determination. "I have to. We cannot stay here." He packed up their camp and helped her onto Copper, then climbed up behind her. She sat in front of him, leaning back against his chest, and he wrapped one arm around her waist to steady her while holding the reins with his other hand. The pack horse followed behind on a lead rope. The journey back to Casa Grande took 4 days. The roads were still treacherous, and Thomas had to move slowly to avoid injuring the horses or jolting Beatrice's ankle. They camped each night, and he cared for her with a gentleness he had not known he possessed. He rebandaged her ankle, made sure she ate enough, kept her warm through the freezing nights. And they talked. Oh, how they talked! Beatrice had a quick wit and a sharp intelligence that had been stifled by her father's expectations and society's narrow view of what a woman should be. She asked him about the places he had seen, the things he had done, and listened with genuine interest. She told him about the books she had read in secret, the dreams she had harbored of a different kind of life, one where she could make her own choices and forge her own path. "What would you do?" Thomas asked one night as they sat by the fire, their shoulders touching. "If you could do anything, be anything, what would you choose?" She was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. "I would like to teach," she said finally. "Children, I mean. There are so few schools out here, so few opportunities for children to learn. I would like to change that somehow. But it is just a dream. I have no training, no credentials." "You could get them," Thomas said. "There are normal schools, teacher training programs. If that is what you want, you could find a way." She looked at him with something like wonder. "You really believe that, do not you, that I could do it? Why would you not be able to? You are smart, you love learning, you care about helping others. That is all you need." My father would say that is nonsense, that my job is to marry well and run a proper household. Your father is not here, Thomas pointed out, and when we get you to Casa Grande, you will be free to make your own choices. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm in his. I am beginning to believe that might actually be true. Something was growing between them, something neither of them had planned or expected. It was in the way they moved around each other, anticipating needs before they were spoken. It was in the long conversations that stretched into the night, covering everything and nothing. It was in the moments of comfortable silence, when words were not necessary because understanding had already been reached. Thomas found himself thinking about her constantly, even when she was right there beside him. He memorized the way her hair caught the firelight, the exact shade of blue in her eyes, the sound of her laugh when something genuinely amused her. He noticed how brave she was, never complaining despite her injury and the hardship of the journey. He saw her kindness in the way she thanked him for even the smallest service, her consideration in asking about his own comfort even when she was clearly hurting. For Beatrice, Thomas represented something she had never encountered before: a good man. Not a man who performed goodness for social approval or business advantage, but someone who was simply decent to his core. He had ridden out into a blizzard for a stranger based on nothing but words on a page. He had cared for her with a respect that never crossed into presumption, despite their forced intimacy. He listened to her thoughts and dreams as if they mattered, as if she mattered beyond her potential as a wife or social ornament. On the third night, as they lay in their shared shelter with the fire crackling nearby, Beatrice turned to face him in the darkness. "Thomas," she said softly, "what happens when we reach Casa Grande? You will stay with Catherine," he said. "You will heal, you will be safe. And you?" "I will go back to my work, I suppose, back to my room at the boarding house." "Oh," she was quiet for a moment. "Of course. You have your own life to return to." He could not see her face clearly in the dim light, but he heard something in her voice, a disappointment that matched the hollow feeling in his own chest. The thought of leaving her, of going back to his solitary existence, felt suddenly unbearable. "Beatrice," he began, then stopped. Unsure how to continue, she waited, her hand finding his in the darkness and squeezing gently. "Yes. I do not want to say goodbye to you," he admitted. "These past few days, they have been the hardest of my life in some ways, but also the best. Being with you, getting to know you, it has made me realize how empty my life was before." "Mine too," she whispered. "I thought running from Raymond Holbrook was about escaping something terrible, but now I think maybe I was also running toward something, toward this, toward you." He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her shadowed face. "I know this is too fast, that we barely know each other, but Beatrice, I am falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I read your letter." Her hand came up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I am falling too. I did not think it was possible to feel this way, especially not after everything that has happened. But you make me feel safe, Thomas. You make me feel like myself, like the person I was always meant to be." He kissed her then, gently, giving her every chance to pull away, but she did not pull away. She kissed him back, her arms coming around his neck, and it felt like coming home to a place he had never been, but had been searching for his entire life. They reached Casa Grande on the afternoon of the fourth day, riding down the main street with the winter sun bright overhead. The snow was melting rapidly now, turning the roads to mud and revealing the familiar desert landscape beneath. People stopped to stare at them, this man and woman riding together on one horse, both looking worn and weathered but also somehow radiant. Catherine Miller came running out of the general store, her face a picture of joy and relief. "Beatrice! Oh, thank God, Beatrice!" Thomas helped Beatrice down from the horse and supported her as Catherine rushed forward to embrace her cousin. The two women clung to each other, crying and laughing simultaneously. Catherine kept touching Beatrice's face as if to confirm she was real, and Beatrice kept saying, "I am here, I am safe, thanks to Thomas." Mrs. Chen appeared along with a small crowd of townspeople who had heard the commotion. The doctor was summoned to examine Beatrice's ankle and treat her frostbite. Thomas found himself being clapped on the back and praised for his rescue, which made him uncomfortable. He had not done it for praise. He had done it because he had to, because something in that letter had called to something in him. Beatrice was installed in Catherine's small house behind the general store, put to bed with hot bricks at her feet and enough blankets to stock a hotel. Dr. Paulson declared that she would recover fully, though the ankle would need time and rest to heal properly. The frostbite was mild enough that she would not lose any fingers or toes, though they would be sensitive to cold for the rest of her life. Thomas visited every day, unable to stay away. He would sit by her bed and they would talk, or sometimes just hold hands in comfortable silence. Catherine watched them with knowing eyes but said nothing, simply making sure to leave them alone together as often as propriety would allow. On the 5th day after their return, Beatrice was able to sit up in a chair by the window, her ankle propped on a cushioned stool. Thomas had brought her a book from the general store, a novel about adventures in South America that he thought she might enjoy. They were reading it together, taking turns with the paragraphs when Catherine came in with a troubled expression. "Beatrice, there is a man here asking after you. He says his name is Dalton, that he works for your father." Beatrice's face went white. "No, oh no." Thomas was on his feet immediately. "Where is he?" "At the boarding house, talking to Mrs. Chen. He does not know yet that Beatrice is here. Mrs. Chen sent her son to warn me." "I will deal with him," Thomas said grimly, but Beatrice grabbed his hand. "Wait. If father sent someone, it means he knows I ran, and if he knows that, then—" She swallowed hard. "Raymond Holbrook knows too. Dalton would not have come alone. There will be others." She was right. When Thomas reached the boarding house, he found not one but 3 men in the common room. One was clearly a servant or employee, well-dressed but deferential. The other 2 were harder men, the kind hired for their muscle and their willingness to look the other way when unpleasant tasks needed doing. "I am looking for Beatrice Robinson," the first man said when Thomas entered. "I am Mr. Dalton, employed by her father, Mr. Harold Robinson of Silver City. We have reason to believe she may have been traveling in this direction when the storm hit." "What business is it of yours?" Thomas asked, keeping his voice level. Dalton's eyes narrowed. "She is Mr. Robinson's daughter. She left home without permission. He is naturally concerned for her welfare. Concerned enough to send hired guns." One of the hard men shifted, his hand moving toward his belt. Dalton held up a hand to stop him. "These men are simply here for protection during the journey. The roads can be dangerous, especially for young women traveling alone," Thomas said. "Is that the danger you are protecting against?" Dalton's face hardened. "I will ask you again. Do you know where Beatrice Robinson is?" Sheriff Morrison chose that moment to walk through the door, and Thomas had never been so glad to see the lawman. Morrison took in the scene with one quick glance, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. "Gentlemen," he said pleasantly, "I hear you are looking for someone. Perhaps you would like to discuss this in my office, where we can sort everything out properly." The hired guns looked to Dalton, who forced a smile. "Of course, Sheriff. We are happy to cooperate with local law enforcement." At the sheriff's office, the truth came out in pieces. Dalton admitted that Beatrice had left Silver City without informing her father of her destination. He claimed that Harold Robinson was beside himself with worry and only wanted his daughter returned safely home. There was no mention of Raymond Holbrook or any arranged marriage. But Sheriff Morrison was not fooled. He had heard Catherine's account of the situation and had made some inquiries of his own via telegraph. He knew about Raymond Holbrook's reputation, about the rumors surrounding Sarah Johnson's sudden departure from Silver City. "Here is the situation as I see it," Morrison said, leaning back in his chair. "Miss Robinson is a grown woman of 22 years. She is free to travel where she likes and live where she chooses. If she is in Casa Grande, which I am not confirming, she is here of her own free will. There is no law that says she must return to her father's house." "Her father has a right to speak with her," Dalton insisted. "If she wants to speak with him, I am sure she will make that known. Until then, you gentlemen are welcome to stay in town as paying guests. But I will warn you now. If there is any trouble, any attempt to force or coerce anyone, I will arrest you so fast your heads will spin. Are we clear?" The men left, but Thomas knew they would not give up that easily. He returned to Catherine's house and found Beatrice pacing the small front room despite her injured ankle. "They are here," she said when she saw him. "I knew father would come after me. I knew Holbrook would not let me go so easily." "You do not have to go back," Thomas said firmly. "The sheriff made that clear. You are an adult. You have the right to make your own choices." "You do not know my father," Beatrice said, her voice breaking. "You do not know how persistent he can be, and Holbrook has money and influence. They will find some way to force me back." Catherine put her arm around her cousin's shoulders. "Not if you are married to someone else," she said quietly. Both Beatrice and Thomas turned to stare at her. Catherine looked between them with a gentle smile. "Forgive me for being blunt," she said, "but I have eyes. I see how you look at each other. I see how you have been inseparable since you returned. If you were to marry, Beatrice, your father would have no legal claim on you anymore. You would be your husband's responsibility, not his." Beatrice sat down heavily, her face flushed. "Catherine, we cannot ask Thomas to do that. It would not be fair to trap him into marriage just to protect me from my father." "You are not trapping me into anything," Thomas said, kneeling in front of her chair so he could look into her eyes. "I have been trying to figure out how to ask you this for days now. I love you, Beatrice. I want to marry you, not because it is practical or convenient, but because the thought of spending my life without you is unbearable. But I did not want to rush you, did not want you to feel pressured after everything you have been through." Tears streamed down her face. "You want to marry me, truly, more than I have ever wanted anything. But it has to be your choice. I will not be another man trying to control your life. If you want time to think, time to heal and decide what you really want, I will wait. And if you decide you do not want marriage at all, I will accept that too, even if it breaks my heart." She cupped his face in her hands, looking at him with such love that it took his breath away. "I do not need time. I know what I want. I want you, Thomas Ashford. I want a life with you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to build something real and true with you, something that is ours and no one else's." He kissed her then, not caring that Catherine was watching, not caring about propriety or convention. This was right. This was meant to be. They were married 2 days later by the town's Methodist minister, with Catherine and Sheriff Morrison as witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that Catherine had altered to fit her, and Thomas wore his best shirt and vest, his hair slicked back and his boots polished to a shine. It was not a grand wedding, but it was perfect. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Thomas kissed his bride, he felt like the richest man in the territory. The confrontation with Dalton and Harold Robinson came the next morning. Beatrice's father had made the journey himself when Dalton wired that she had been found. He arrived in Casa Grande in a private coach, his face thunderous with anger. Thomas and Beatrice met him in Sheriff Morrison's office, with the lawman present to keep things civil. Harold Robinson was a tall, thin man with iron-gray hair and the cold eyes of someone used to getting his way. He barely glanced at Thomas, focusing all his attention on his daughter. "Beatrice, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Running away like a common thief, worrying me sick, and now I hear you have married some cowboy you barely know." "His name is Thomas Ashford," Beatrice said quietly but firmly. "He is my husband. And I left because you were trying to force me to marry Raymond Holbrook, a man I despise." "Despise? Do not be dramatic. Holbrook is a fine match, a man of standing and wealth. He would have given you everything." "Everything but my freedom," Beatrice shot back. "Everything but my dignity and my safety. I know what he did to Sarah Johnson, father. I know what kind of man he truly is." Harold's face reddened. "Malicious gossip from bitter women. Holbrook explained all that to me." The Johnson girl made advances toward him, and when he refused her, she and her mother spread lies. "That is not what happened, and you know it," Beatrice said. "Or you would know it if you cared enough to look beyond what is convenient for your business interests." "You ungrateful child," Harold said coldly. "After everything I have done for you, the education I provided, the society I introduced you to, this is how you repay me. By throwing yourself away on a nobody." Thomas had been silent until then, but this was too much. "I may be a nobody by your standards," he said, his voice hard, "but I love your daughter. I will spend every day of my life making her happy and keeping her safe. Can Raymond Holbrook say the same?" Harold finally looked at him, his eyes raking Thomas from head to toe with obvious disdain. "You know nothing about Raymond Holbrook or what he can offer. You are a poor ranch hand with no prospects and no future. My daughter was raised for better than this." "Your daughter was raised to be a thing to be traded for business advantages," Thomas said. "But she is a person, Mr. Robinson. A smart, brave, wonderful person who deserves to make her own choices. And she chose me." "This marriage is a sham," Harold declared. "I will have it annulled. I will sue. I will make sure you never work in this territory again." Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Robinson, you will do no such thing. The marriage is legal and binding. Miss Robinson, or I should say Mrs. Ashford, is of legal age and married of her own free will. You have no grounds for annulment or any legal action whatsoever." Harold turned on the sheriff. "Do you know who I am? Do you know how much influence I have?" "In Silver City, perhaps," Morrison said calmly. "But this is Casa Grande, and here the law is the law regardless of how much money a man has. Your daughter has made her choice. I suggest you respect it." Harold stared at Beatrice for a long moment, his face a mask of cold fury. "You are making a terrible mistake," he said finally. "When this cowboy leaves you penniless and broken, do not come crying to me. You have made your bed. Now lie in it." He turned and stalked out, slamming the door behind him. Beatrice stood rigid for a moment, then her legs gave out. Thomas caught her, holding her as she sobbed against his chest. "I am sorry," she gasped between tears. "I am so sorry he said those things to you." "Do not apologize for him," Thomas said, stroking her hair. "He is angry because he lost control over you. That is not your fault. He will tell people terrible things about me," she said. "He will ruin my reputation." "Let him," Thomas said. "Your reputation in Silver City means nothing to us. We will build a life here in Casa Grande with people who care about who we are, not where we came from or who our families are." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes red but her expression determined. "You are right. I am Mrs. Thomas Ashford now. That is all that matters." The first year of their marriage was not easy. Thomas's wages as a ranch hand were modest, and they lived in 2 rooms above the general store that Catherine helped them rent at a reduced rate. Money was tight, and there were times when Beatrice had to let out sewing to make ends meet. But they were happy in a way that neither had ever known before. Thomas would come home from long days working cattle, exhausted and covered in dust, and find Beatrice waiting with dinner prepared and the room spotless. She would help him wash up, and they would eat together, talking about their days and making plans for the future. At night, they would lie in their narrow bed, wrapped in each other's arms, and feel like the wealthiest people in the world. Beatrice did not let go of her dream of teaching. She began volunteering at the small schoolhouse in Casa Grande, helping the overwhelmed teacher manage the 30 children of various ages who attended sporadically. The children loved her, and she had a natural gift for explaining difficult concepts in ways they could understand. The teacher, an older woman named Miss Hartley, encouraged her to seek formal training. "You could go to the normal school in Prescott," Miss Hartley said. "They have a summer program. It is only 8 weeks, but it would give you the credentials to teach officially." Beatrice brought the idea to Thomas that night, nervous about suggesting something that would take her away for 2 months and cost money they did not have. But Thomas immediately saw how much it meant to her. "You should go," he said. "We will find the money somehow." "Thomas, it costs $50 for tuition, plus I would need to pay for lodging and food in Prescott. We do not have that kind of money." "Then I will work extra. I will take on night jobs, anything I can find. Beatrice, you want this. You should have it." She kissed him fiercely. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I am the lucky one," he said. "Never forget that." Thomas took a second job doing overnight freight loading at the rail depot. He would work the ranch during the day, come home for a quick dinner with Beatrice, then head to the depot for 5 hours of hauling cargo. He came home exhausted every night, but when Beatrice showed him her growing savings for the normal school, her face glowing with hope, it was worth every aching muscle. Meanwhile, Catherine had news of her own. She had been corresponding with a widower in Tucson, a shopkeeper named Daniel Grant who had 2 young children. They had been writing for 6 months, and he had proposed via letter. Catherine showed Beatrice the proposal, her face pink with pleasure and embarrassment. "I am 40 years old," she said. "I never thought I would marry, but Daniel seems kind and his letters make me laugh. Is it foolish to consider marrying a man I have only met once years ago?" "It is not foolish if it makes you happy," Beatrice assured her. "And after the children and I leave, you would be alone here. Perhaps this is meant to be." "The children?" Catherine asked, raising an eyebrow. Beatrice blushed. "I am with child. Only 2 months along, so I have not told anyone yet except Thomas. But yes, by autumn you will be a cousin aunt." The 2 women embraced, both crying happy tears. Catherine's wedding to Daniel Grant took place in April, a cheerful affair with his 2 children serving as flower girl and ring bearer. Beatrice stood up as maid of honor, her pregnancy just beginning to show beneath her carefully draped dress. After the wedding, Catherine moved to Tucson, and Beatrice took over managing the small house behind the general store. That summer, Beatrice did attend the normal school in Prescott, though it was difficult being away from Thomas for 8 weeks. He wrote to her every week, long letters full of news about Casa Grande and expressions of how much he missed her. She wrote back with stories of her classes and growing excitement about her future as a teacher. She also wrote about the baby growing inside her, about her hopes and fears for their coming child. Thomas's responses were tender and reassuring, promising that they would be good parents together, that their child would be loved and cherished. When Beatrice returned from Prescott in late August, certified as a teacher, Thomas was waiting at the stage stop with a bouquet of wildflowers. She was visibly pregnant now, her belly rounded beneath her traveling dress. He swept her into his arms, flowers and all, and kissed her with a passion that made the other passengers avert their eyes. "I missed you so much," he murmured against her hair. "The house was so empty without you." "I am home now," she said, "and I am not going anywhere ever again." Their son was born in October, after a long labor that terrified Thomas, but that Beatrice endured with remarkable strength. They named him William Thomas Ashford, and he had his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair. Thomas held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the rush of love and protectiveness. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Beatrice, he is perfect. We made him," she said tiredly but happily. "You and me together." The first months of parenthood were exhausting. William was a colicky baby who cried often and slept little. Thomas and Beatrice took turns walking him through the night, singing lullabies and telling stories until the infant finally settled. They were constantly tired, but also filled with a bone-deep contentment. This was their family. This was what they had built together. When William was 6 months old, Beatrice began teaching at the Casa Grande schoolhouse 3 days a week, bringing the baby with her. The older girls took turns watching him while she taught the lessons, and William became the unofficial school mascot. He was a happy baby when he was not colicky, quick to smile and laugh, and the children adored him. Thomas had been promoted to foreman at the ranch, which came with better pay and a small house on the property. They moved out of the rooms above the general store and into the ranch house, which had 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and even a small parlor. Beatrice cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by how far they had come from those early days of scraping by. "We are doing it," she said, looking around at their new home. "We are actually building a life." "We are," Thomas agreed, pulling her close. "And it is a good life, Bea. Better than I ever imagined." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas managed the ranch, overseeing the cowboys and making decisions about the herd. Beatrice taught her students and cared for William, who was growing into a bright, curious toddler. They made friends in Casa Grande, real friends who cared about them for who they were. They attended church socials and town gatherings, and slowly became pillars of the small community. 2 years after William was born, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she carried well into her 8th month before the baby decided to make an appearance. Their daughter, Anne Catherine Ashford, was born on a warm spring morning, with considerably less drama than her brother's arrival. She was a beautiful baby with dark hair like her father and a personality that was evident from day one. Where William had been fussy and difficult, Anne was placid and content. She slept through the night within weeks and rarely cried. Beatrice joked that God was giving them a break after William's difficult infancy. "Or preparing us for more to come," Thomas said, but he was smiling as he rocked his daughter, completely besotted with her. When Anne was 1 year old, a letter arrived from Silver City. It was addressed to Beatrice in an unfamiliar hand, and she opened it with trepidation. The letter was from a lawyer, informing her that Harold Robinson had died of a heart attack. As his only child, she was his sole heir. Beatrice sat down heavily, the letter trembling in her hands. Thomas read over her shoulder, then wrapped his arms around her. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I have not spoken to him in 4 years. I thought I had made my peace with that, with losing him. But now he is actually gone, and I do not know what I feel." "You do not have to know right now," Thomas said gently. "Take your time." The inheritance was substantial. Harold Robinson had been a wealthy man, and he had never changed his will after Beatrice left. The lawyer explained that everything came to her: the house in Silver City, the bank stocks, the savings accounts. It was more money than Thomas and Beatrice had ever imagined having. "What do we do with it?" Beatrice asked, looking at the paperwork spread across their kitchen table. "It feels wrong somehow, taking money from a man who disowned me." "He did not disown you legally," Thomas pointed out. "He was angry, but he never actually disinherited you. Maybe on some level he hoped you would come back. Or maybe he just never thought he would die before we reconciled," Beatrice said sadly. "Either way, he is gone, and I have to decide what to do with this." After much discussion, they decided to keep enough of the inheritance to secure their family's future and use the rest for good. They sold the house in Silver City and used the money to build a real school in Casa Grande, a proper building with separate rooms for different age groups, a library, and supplies for all the students. Beatrice hired 2 more teachers to help manage the growing student population, and the school became the pride of the town. They also set aside money for their children's education, determined that William and Anne would have opportunities that neither Thomas nor Beatrice had enjoyed. And they bought a small ranch of their own, with good grazing land and a solid house that they could expand as their family grew, because their family did continue to grow. 2 years after Anne came Samuel, a rambunctious boy who seemed to be born running. 3 years later came twin girls, Emma and Alina, who were as alike as 2 drops of water and who delighted in confusing everyone about which was which. And finally, when Beatrice was 35 and thought they were done having children, came little Margaret, a surprise baby who stole everyone's hearts. The ranch house expanded with the family, rooms added as needed. It was a warm, chaotic, loving home filled with children's laughter and the comfortable rhythms of family life. Thomas would come in from working the herd and be mobbed by his children, each clamoring for attention. Beatrice would watch from the kitchen doorway, her heart full to bursting with love for this man and the family they had created together. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Thomas and Beatrice would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. They would hold hands and talk about their day, about their dreams for the future, about how grateful they were for the path that had led them to each other. "You ever think about that blizzard?" Beatrice asked one evening when they had been married for 15 years. "About how everything would be different if it had not happened, if your letter had never made it to Catherine." "I think about it sometimes," Thomas admitted, "but mostly I just thank God for it. That storm brought you to me. It brought me everything that matters." "You rode through hell to find me," Beatrice said, echoing the words she had said to him years ago on their first anniversary. "Through snow and ice and danger to find a woman you had never met." "And I would do it again in a heartbeat," Thomas said. "Every single time, I would ride out to find you." She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching as their oldest son, William, now 14 and nearly as tall as his father, worked with the horses in the corral. Anne, 12 and already showing signs of her mother's teaching gift, was helping the younger children with their lessons inside. The twins were probably getting into some kind of mischief, and Samuel was undoubtedly with them. Baby Margaret was asleep in her cradle in the house. "We have built something good here," Beatrice said, "something real and lasting." "We have," Thomas agreed, and it all started with a letter frozen in a dead woman's hand. It was a grim image, but true. That letter, carried through a blizzard by a woman who died trying to deliver it, had changed everything. It had brought Thomas to Beatrice, and Beatrice to the life she was meant to live. The stage passenger's death had not been in vain. She had been part of a story larger than herself, a story of love and courage and the stubborn human refusal to give up hope. As the years passed, Thomas and Beatrice watched their children grow into capable, confident adults. William took over management of the ranch when Thomas's back started giving him trouble. Anne became the head teacher at the school her mother had founded, eventually taking it over entirely when Beatrice retired. Samuel became a doctor, returning from medical school in Chicago to serve the community he had grown up in. The twins married brothers and moved to a neighboring ranch, where they raised their children within sight of their childhood home. And Margaret, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, one of the first women to practice law in Arizona. Thomas and Beatrice grew old together, their hair turning gray and then white, their hands becoming gnarled and spotted with age, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming richer and more complex with each passing year. They knew each other completely, in the way that only comes from decades of shared life. They could communicate with a glance, finish each other's sentences, and still made each other laugh after all those years. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were more than 30 people there, 3 generations of Ashfords, all descending from that improbable meeting in a frozen cave. William's oldest son, also named Thomas, gave a toast. "To my grandparents," he said, raising his glass. "Who taught us all what real love looks like? Who showed us that the best things in life are worth riding through hell to find?" Thomas looked at Beatrice, and she looked back at him, and in that moment they were 26 and 22 again, huddled together in a cave with a fire burning, falling in love in the most unlikely of circumstances. "To us," Thomas said softly, touching his glass to hers. "To us," Beatrice echoed, "and to the blizzard that brought us together." They lived well into their 70s, an impressive age for the frontier. Thomas died first, peacefully in his sleep one autumn night with Beatrice lying beside him holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you, Bea. Thank you for choosing me." She survived him by 2 years, staying in the ranch house surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She spent her final months writing down the story of how she and Thomas had met, wanting future generations to know about the letter frozen in a dead woman's hand, about the cowboy who rode through a blizzard to find her, about the love that had built a legacy. When she died, also peacefully in her sleep, the family found the manuscript on her bedside table. William had it bound in leather and made copies for all his siblings. It became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through the generations, the story of Thomas and Beatrice Ashford and the blizzard that changed everything. The school that Beatrice founded still stands in Casa Grande, though it has been expanded and modernized many times over the years. There is a plaque in the entrance hall that reads, "Founded by Beatrice Robinson Ashford, 1878, a woman who believed in the power of education and the strength of the human spirit." The ranch that Thomas and Beatrice built is still in the family, now managed by the 6th generation of Ashfords. They still run cattle, though with modern equipment and methods that Thomas would barely recognize. But the original house is preserved, a museum of sorts, where visitors can see the rooms where Thomas and Beatrice raised their 6 children, where they built their life together from scratch. Their story became legend in Casa Grande, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But it was not a myth. It was real. The blizzard really did bring a frozen letter. The cowboy really did ride through hell to find the woman who wrote it. And they really did fall in love, building a life and a family that endured long after they were gone. It was a reminder that even in the hardest times, even in the most impossible circumstances, love can find a way. that courage and kindness matter. That one person's actions can ripple outward, changing lives in ways they could never imagine. The woman who died on that stage, carrying Beatrice's letter, never knew that her death would lead to such a story. But she played her part, delivering that letter even unto death, ensuring that it reached the hands it needed to reach. In a way, she was the first hero of this story, the one whose sacrifice made everything else possible. And Beatrice never forgot that. Every year on the anniversary of the blizzard, she would say a prayer for the unknown woman who had died carrying her plea for help. She would thank her, wherever she was, for not giving up, for holding on to that letter until the very end. Because that letter was more than just paper and ink. It was hope. It was a lifeline thrown across the darkness. And when Thomas found it, when he read those desperate words and decided to ride out into a frozen hell to find their author, he was answering a call that went deeper than duty or even compassion. He was answering the call of love, though he did not know it yet. He was riding toward his destiny, toward the woman who would become his everything, toward the life he was meant to live. And Beatrice, huddled in that cave, freezing and alone, waiting for a death that seemed inevitable, was also waiting for her destiny. Waiting for the sound of hoofbeats, for a voice calling her name, for the man who would change everything. When Thomas finally found her, when he wrapped her in his coat and built a fire to warm her frozen body, when he looked at her with such fierce determination and said, "You are not dying. Not anymore," something fundamental shifted in the universe. Two souls recognized each other, two lives aligned. Everything that came after, the marriage and the children and the ranch and the school, all of it flowed from that moment. From the decision Thomas made to ride out looking for a stranger, from the courage Beatrice showed in running from a life she did not want, from the letter that survived a blizzard to bring them together. It was a love story for the ages, the kind that reminds us why we tell love stories in the first place. Not because they are easy or simple, but because they are true. Because love, real love, is worth fighting for. Worth riding through hell for. Worth building a life on. Thomas and Beatrice Ashford knew that truth in their bones. They lived it every day of their long marriage. And when they died, they left behind not just children and grandchildren, not just a ranch and a school, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Their great-great-grandchildren still tell the story, still talk about the blizzard and the letter and the cowboy who rode through hell, still point to the old photographs, faded now with age, showing a stern-looking man with kind eyes and a woman with a gentle smile. Still say with pride, "That is where we come from. That is the foundation we are built on." And on winter nights when the wind howls across the Arizona desert, when snow occasionally dusts the saguaros and the cold bites deep, people in Casa Grande remember. They remember the blizzard of 1878, the one that killed so many and changed so much. They remember the frozen letter and the cowboy who read it. They remember the love story that began in a cave and ended only when death parted them after 42 years of marriage. They remember because some stories are too important to forget, some loves too powerful to fade, some legacies too meaningful to let slip away. Thomas and Beatrice Ashford lived a simple life by some standards. They were not famous beyond their small community. They did not change the course of history or invent anything revolutionary. But they did something equally important. They loved each other truly and completely, and from that love, they built something that lasted. That is the real magic of their story, not the dramatic rescue or the frozen letter or even the blizzard itself, but what came after. The quiet daily choice to love, to support, to build together. The willingness to work hard and sacrifice for each other and their children. The determination to create something meaningful from the raw materials of their love, in the end, is that not what we all hope for? Not grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though those make for good stories, but the steady, enduring love of another person, the warmth of a hand in ours, the comfort of a familiar voice, the knowledge that we are not alone. Thomas and Beatrice found that in each other. Against all odds, in the middle of a frozen hell, they found each other. And having found each other, they held on tight and never let go. That is the story of the blizzard that brought a frozen letter, and the cowboy who rode through hell to find the woman who wrote it. It is a story of courage and desperation, of fate and choice, of death and life and love triumphant. It is a story that deserves to be told and remembered, passed down through the generations as a reminder of what we are capable of when we are brave enough to follow our hearts, when we are willing to ride through hell for the people we love. And somewhere, in some better place beyond this one, Thomas and Beatrice Ashford are together still, their love undiminished by time or death. They are young again, standing in that cave with the fire burning bright, falling in love for the first time all over again for eternity. The end of their earthly story is just the beginning of something greater, something that cannot be measured in years or contained in words. Their love endures in their descendants, in the institutions they founded, in the very soil of the land they called home. And every time someone in Casa Grande tells the story of the blizzard and the letter and the cowboy, Thomas and Beatrice live again. Their love is remembered, celebrated, and held up as an example of what is possible when two people truly commit to each other and to building a life together. That is immortality of the best kind. Not fame or fortune, but love that echoes through the generations, inspiring others to be brave, to be kind, to choose love even when it seems impossible. Thomas Ashford rode through hell for Beatrice Robinson, and she chose him over the safe, respectable life her father had planned for her. Together, they created something beautiful from that unlikely beginning, something that continues to ripple outward long after they are gone. And that truly is the end of their story and the beginning of their legacy. A legacy of love, courage, and the unshakable belief that some things are worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth riding through hell for. Some things, like the love between Thomas and Beatrice Ashford, are worth everything,